Imagine a snow-blanketed ranch land, stretching endlessly beneath a raging Montana blizzard, whistling winds and swirling drifts that can swallow a person whole. Luke Anderson. A seasoned rancher with every reason to stay huddled by a crackling fire stumbles upon an impossible sight. A half-frozen stranger, an unconscious woman, collapsed in the storm's fury. She clutches a curious, leather-bound journal that seems older than any living soul. Within it lies a shocking secret, a coded map leading to a long-rumored lost treasure said to reshape fortunes. As Luke rushes to save her life, he unwittingly opens the door to a world of hidden pasts, violent betrayals, and desperate pursuits. Luke Anderson was as rugged and steadfast as the Montana mountains that outlined his family's ranch. The land, a sprawling 5,000-acre property just outside of Billings, had belonged to the Andersons for generations. Cattle roamed wild across the foothills' fences, stretched for miles, and the wide Montana sky seemed both majestic and foreboding in equal measure. From a young age, Luke learned to respect the land's moods, searing heat in the summer, bone-chilling cold in the winter, and sudden tempests that could snatch a soul from the earth without warning. That January had been particularly brutal. The National Weather Service in Billings issued an urgent blizzard warning that rattled even the seasoned ranchers. Luke prepped his barns, secured extra feed, and made sure the ranch hands had warm, dry quarters. Yet as the howling wind descended on the ranch late one afternoon, Luke felt a prickle of unease. The clouds overhead roiled with fierce intent, and the sharp tang of icy air told him that this was no ordinary storm. "Better get the horses inside," Luke called out to his longtime friend and ranch hand, Manny Alvarez, who'd worked with him since they were teenagers. Manny nodded, eyes wide. Without another word, they both set to work, bracing doors, corralling the animals, and double-checking the generator. Snow began to fall with a heavy steadiness that made the world turn white. In a matter of hours, the ranch was nearly drowned in swirling drifts. The storm raged well into the evening. Luke was about to settle down with a mug of coffee in the ranch house. He pulled aside the window curtain and peered out at the ghostly shapes of towering snowbanks. That was when, in a flash of lightning-like brightness from a rogue electrical arc overhead, he saw movement near his front gate. At first he assumed it was a stray steer, but he caught a glimpse of something different, a human figure stumbling, swaying, and finally collapsing. Shock jolted him into action. Without hesitation, he hollered for Manny, tossed on his heavy winter coat, and grabbed his lantern. The driving snow lashed at him mercilessly as he trudged toward the gate. What he found made his heart lurch. A woman lay half-buried in the powder, her lips tinged blue clothing soaked and frosted with ice. She clutched a worn leather journal in one hand, her fingers stiff from the cold. Luke dropped to his knees. "Hey, can you hear me?" he shouted over the wind. She didn't respond, didn't so much as twitch. Carefully he lifted her limp form and turned back toward the ranch house. Manny appeared, bracing the door open against the gale. Together they carried the stranger inside and lowered her onto the living room sofa, piling blankets over her. Her hair was matted and stuck with ice crystals, her face dangerously pale. Manny raced to bring hot towels and a portable heater. Luke tugged off her coat and boots with numb fingers. "Call Dr. O'Connor." Luke directed Manny, referencing the local physician who'd known the Anderson family for years. Manny disappeared to make the call. Meanwhile, Luke's gaze fell upon the leather-bound journal clutched in the woman's hand. He gently pried it loose, set it aside on the coffee table, and focused on warming her up. not giving the journal another thought for the moment. Her breathing was faint but present. Luke knew he had to get her core temperature up. Every second mattered. He rummaged for warm clothes and extra blankets. He rubbed her hands, instructing Manny, who rushed back in with medical supplies to keep applying heat packs. Soon the woman coughed weakly, giving Luke hope. "All right," he murmured with relief. "Stay with us." By the time Dr. O'Connor arrived, the woman's eyes had fluttered open for a moment, but she was still delirious. With professional efficiency, Dr. O'Connor administered warm IV fluids, checked vitals, and recommended they keep her stable and watch for signs of hypothermia-induced complications. "She's lucky," the doctor said gravely. "In this storm, most people wouldn't make it 10 minutes. The question is what brought her out here in the first place." Luke glanced uncertainly at the battered leather journal. Snow clung to its edges, moisture warping the cover. With a sense of foreboding, Luke decided to leave it be for now. Morning light filtered through the frosted windows, revealing a world transformed by the blizzard's wrath. Snowdrifts climbed to the porch railing, and the ranch sat in a hush, insulated by a foot or more of fresh powder. By some small mercy, the wind had died down. The stranger slept fitfully all night on Luke's sofa. By dawn, Manny had brewed strong coffee, while Dr. O'Connor checked her condition again. When she finally stirred, her eyes snapped open in wide, frantic confusion. She sat up, blankets falling aside. "Easy there," Luke said softly, stepping forward. "You're safe." The woman's gaze darted around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. The crackling fireplace, the sturdy wooden beams overhead, Manny and the doctor standing near the dining table. Her breathing was ragged. Where am I?" she finally managed. "You're on my ranch," Luke explained. "I found you near the front gate last night in the middle of that storm." She swallowed hard, wincing as if everything hurt. "Thank you for saving me." She turned her head, spotting the coat draped over a nearby chair. "I was headed north," she said, her voice trembling, looking for help. "Must have gotten lost," Manny chimed in, keeping his tone gentle. "The roads are all closed off. Hardly anyone's moving right now." Dr. O'Connor stepped up to check her vitals. "Miss, you gave us all quite a scare. Can you tell us your name?" She glanced around as if uncertain. Then she answered. "Claire. Claire Wyatt." Luke nodded, storing the name in his memory. "Claire Wyatt. All right. Well, you're welcome to rest here as long as you need. There's no going anywhere until they plow the roads." Manny offered her a mug of steaming tea. She cupped it between her palms, letting the warmth seep in. "I appreciate that," Claire said, softly. I really do." Only then did her eyes drift to the old leather journal on the coffee table. A flicker of panic crossed her face, as if she'd forgotten it for a moment. "My journal," she whispered, setting down the tea carefully. She reached for it with trembling hands. Luke noticed how tightly she gripped it, her expression shifting from relief to guarded concern, as though the small book was a lifeline. "Glad we found it," Luke said, trying to appear casual. But a curiosity was taking hold of him. After all, if the contents were important enough to carry through a killer storm, it had to mean something. Claire offered a tight smile. "I'm just glad it's safe." Over the next 2 days, the blizzard's aftermath left the ranch cut off from the main roads. Phone lines were spotty, but Manny managed to keep the generator running. Claire remained in the ranch house, slowly regaining her strength under Dr. O'Connor's watchful care. though physically she improved, something weighed heavily on her mind, making her appear guarded and anxious. Luke tried to respect her privacy. After all, she was a stranger he'd rescued from certain death. But as the weather cleared and the ranch came back to life, he couldn't ignore the atmosphere of tension surrounding Claire. She was unusually quiet, her eyes often drifting to the windows, scanning the horizon, as though she expected someone or something to appear. Early one morning, Luke emerged from his bedroom to find her in the living room, flipping through the old journal with fervent attention. The look on her face reminded him of a detective piecing together a puzzle. She didn't notice him at first, but when the floorboards creaked under his step, she shut the journal quickly. Couldn't sleep. Luke asked gently, moving to the kitchen to start a pot of coffee. She shrugged, hugging the journal to her chest. Nightmares. Or maybe I'm just restless. He nodded, letting a comfortable silence unfold until the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Then he leaned against the counter. I was wondering, he ventured carefully, what brought you out to these parts. Folks around here tend not to wander on foot during a storm. Claire's gaze flickered to the book. I'm here chasing a rumor, she admitted. She swallowed, choosing her words with caution. Heard there might be something valuable hidden in this region. An old story from my grandfather. I didn't expect the blizzard to catch me off guard. Luke raised an eyebrow. Valuable like gold or something? She gave a hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Treasure of a sort, but I'm not exactly sure what form it takes. She ran a hand over the journal's worn cover. My grandfather, Stuart Wyatt, claimed his father found references to a lost deposit of gold hidden by an old expedition in the late 1800s. Something about unscrupulous fortune seekers burying part of their find near a ranch up in Montana. Honestly, I'm still unraveling the puzzle. The mention of lost gold made Luke's mind spin. Folklore about hidden riches sprinkled the West like seeds, but very few turned out to be more than tall tales. Yet Claire's sincerity was disarming. Well, we do have a lot of old stories around these parts, Luke said. Gold rush days left behind more rumors than actual fortunes. Claire nodded, clutching the journal. True. I'm sure plenty of folks have chased ghosts. But my grandpa insisted our family's version was real. After he passed, I found this journal among his things. The map is incomplete, references coded. I was trying to verify some of the local landmarks. Then the storm hit. Luke studied her. She seemed haunted, standing there in her borrowed sweater and thick socks, scanning a fragile text from yesteryear. A sharp wave of sympathy washed over him. Look, he said. Voice quiet if you need help. I might know a few local historians or surveyors who can decipher old land records. We have a friend in Helena, Dr. Harriet L. Jacobs. She's a professor emeritus of Western history at the University of Montana. Manny and I have consulted her a couple times about the ranch's documents. Claire's eyes lit up a mixture of hope and anxiety. That might be really helpful, she said softly. Although the sun finally broke through after days of gloom, the roads remained partially impassable for a while. Luke used his truck outfitted with chains to make a supply run into Billings. Manny stayed behind at the ranch to keep an eye on things and to watch over Claire, who was still too weak to travel far. Luke felt a tug of excitement and apprehension. If there was any truth to Claire's story, unearthing a lost gold deposit could mean life-changing wealth. But such stories also drew unsavory characters. The last thing Luke wanted was trouble on his property. Sure enough, trouble loomed closer than he realized. While Luke was away, Manny heard the sound of an approaching vehicle crunching over frozen tracks. Looking out the front window, he saw a rugged SUV pulling up by the gate. It was unusual enough to put Manny on edge. He stepped onto the porch, noticing how the man who emerged had a disheveled appearance, long, greasy hair stuffed under a beanie, cheeks flushed with cold. The man shouted over the distance, "Hey, you folks got room for a traveler? My car's slipping on the roads." Manny frowned, crossing his arms. Something about this stranger set his nerves on alert. "Roads are rough," Manny allowed, "but you might find refuge at the diner in town if you can make it. We're not taking in visitors right now." The man's gaze slid past Manny to the house. "Well, you sure? Heard there might be folks here who can help. Name's Axel Drake, by the way." Manny could feel eyes scanning him for weakness. He didn't like it. "We're all good here, Mr. Drake," Manny said, not budging. "Try the next property down the highway." Axel stared a moment, tight-lipped. Then, with a curt nod, he muttered something Manny couldn't catch and climbed back into his SUV. The vehicle reversed out of the driveway, tires spinning in the snow. Manny waited until it vanished behind a swirl of snow before going back inside. Claire stood by the window, her face taut. "Who was that?" she asked, worry threading her voice. Manny shrugged, forcing nonchalance. "Just some drifter, maybe." Claire pressed her lips together. "He could be looking for me." Manny's eyebrows shot up. "Why do you say that?" She hesitated, glancing at her journal. "Because I'm not the only one who's heard about the treasure. I might have mentioned it to a few people in passing when I was asking around. If he suspects I have the map." She trailed off, biting her lip. Sighing, Manny nodded. "Let's hope that's not the case," he said, but a chill ran up his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. When Luke returned later, Manny immediately briefed him on Axel Drake's appearance at the gate. Claire grew pale as Manny recounted the exchange. After some hemming and hawing, Claire finally leveled with them. Her grandfather's journal contained the partial map references and cryptic clues about a hidden gold stash, rumored to be worth millions in today's market. Over time, she had done some genealogical research, discovering that the original expedition, led by a shady prospector named Hale Danforth, had robbed a stagecoach and fled into the Montana wilderness in the 1880s. Fearing capture, the bandits supposedly buried a portion of their stolen gold near a ranch that once belonged to Danforth's cousin. However, a snowstorm hit, killing some of the outlaws. Others vanished. The treasure was never recovered. Over the years, fragments of the story passed through families, hushed whispers of a fabled fortune. Claire's great-grandfather was said to be connected to one of the men who survived obtaining a coded journal that spelled out a rough location somewhere in southwestern Montana. "I think the ranch they mention might be near here," Claire told Luke and Manny, tapping the journal's yellowed pages. "I need to confirm the old land boundaries. They've changed a lot since the 1800s. The best place to start is the county registrar's office in Billings, or someone who's specialized in Montana land surveys." Luke folded his arms. That might explain Axel Drake's interest if he's after the same thing, he said gravely. "Gold fever never really went away in these parts." Claire nodded. "He probably wants the journal. I'm sure he's not working alone. These things tend to draw a certain kind of crowd." Though Manny and Luke exchanged a look of concern, they also felt a surge of protective adrenaline. If danger was on the horizon, they intended to be prepared. "How about this?" Luke offered. "We'll contact Dr. Harriet L. Jacobs in Helena. She's a friend." She might be able to interpret these references or point us toward the correct archives. Once the roads improve, I can drive you out there. Manny can hold down the fort. Keep an eye out in case anyone else comes snooping." Claire lowered her gaze. "You've already done so much." Luke raised a hand. "Think of it as paying off a debt. You were freezing to death on my property after all. There's got to be a reason we crossed paths." Claire swallowed. Tears glistened in her eyes, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. By the time they managed to make the trek to Helena, a few days later, the ranch had settled into post-blizzard calm. Manny promised to keep a close watch, especially for that drifter, Axel Drake. Dr. O'Connor visited to confirm Claire's health was stable enough to travel. The drive was long but scenic, winding through valleys of snow-draped pine forests and broad plains glittering under the winter sun. In the front seat of Luke's truck, Claire clutched her journal. Eyes flicking anxiously to the rearview mirror every so often, Luke, noticing her tension, tried to lighten the mood. "Ever seen big sky country like this?" he asked, gesturing to the horizon. Claire shook her head. "Never. It's beautiful, but in a harsh, wild way." Luke let her words hang. Montana was indeed a land of stark contrasts, magnificent, but unforgiving. Just like the stories of old treasure, compelling but dangerous. They arrived in Helena that afternoon. The grand stone edifice of the Montana Historical Society Library loomed, housing archives that charted the state's turbulent frontier days. Dr. Harriet L. Jacobs, a spry woman in her 70s with a thick head of white curls, greeted Luke warmly. "Luke Anderson." "I haven't seen you in ages," she exclaimed, hugging him. "And who is this Dr. Jacobs? Meet Claire Wyatt. She's got an old journal we'd like you to look at." In a quiet reading room lined with dusty tomes, Claire gingerly laid out the journal for Dr. Jacobs. Harriet peered through her reading glasses, flipping carefully through the brittle pages, pausing at the sketches and coded notations. "This is definitely late 19th century, Dr. Jacobs murmured. "See the penmanship. The style of the binding. I'd guess 1880s or so. Some of these references." She trailed off, squinting at a particular page. "Looks like they're referencing topographical features, rivers, rock formations. But they're not named. Instead, we have a set of initials HDSBGR, all repeated. Possibly the men from the expedition." Claire nodded. "Hale Danforth is the name I've heard. Could HD stand for him?" Dr. Jacobs tapped the page. "Very likely. And these lines here. They look like ciphers. Some correspond to numbers, possibly latitudes or longitudes. But it's incomplete." She looked up at Claire. "Where did you say you found this?" "My grandfather kept it hidden for years," Claire answered softly. "He believed it pointed to lost gold, but the directions are obscure." Dr. Jacobs nodded knowingly. "There are plenty of legends about Danforth's gang burying loot. Most are unsubstantiated, but if we cross-reference these coordinates and notations with old county maps from that era, we might narrow down the location." With a small grin of excitement, Dr. Jacobs led them to a large table of archived maps. For the next few hours, they pored over every detail from county lines to rivers that had changed course. Bits and pieces began to match up with the coded references. A ridge here, a fork in a creek there. Finally, Dr. Jacobs circled a location on a 1886 land survey map. "Notice how the boundary lines of this area, south of Billings, used to be different." The ranch that existed here was once called the Danforth Homestead, she explained, glancing at Luke. Is that anywhere near your property? Luke stiffened, leaning forward. The circled region was frighteningly close to the northwest corner of his ranch, an area he rarely ventured into because of steep ravines. And right near that corner ran a portion of the Musselshell River, driving back from Helena. Luke felt an uneasy weight in his gut. The discovered clue meant that the rumored treasure might actually be hidden on or near his own family ranch. For generations, the Andersons had lived on that land without any knowledge of Danforth's secret gold. The notion baffled him. Claire stared at the map Harriet Jacobs had given them, now folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes glowed with the intensity of someone on the cusp of a life-altering find. Yet fear laced her excitement. Someone else knew or suspected the same treasure's location, and that person might not be as benevolent. She turned to Luke. If it's really on your land, we can search together. But if you want nothing to do with it, I'll understand. I never meant to drag you into a dangerous situation. Luke gripped the steering wheel. His mind reeled with conflicting thoughts. The ranch was his responsibility, the legacy of his forebears. Unearthing stolen gold could tarnish that legacy or cause a whirlwind of legal headaches. But at the same time, the possibility of a historical fortune was too significant to ignore. And there was Claire Ernest, brave and clearly in over her head. We'll figure it out, he said at last, giving her a reassuring nod. One step at a time. They reached the ranch at twilight. Manny greeted them with tension etched on his face. No sign of that Axel Drake character, but I did catch glimpses of a vehicle parked up the road a ways. Not sure if it was his. Luke frowned. We'll keep our eyes open. Let's get some rest. Tomorrow we'll ride out to the northwest corner and see what we can find. Carefully. Claire shifted uncomfortably. Are you sure we shouldn't wait for more backup? Luke gave her a thin smile. We'll be cautious. Manny knows the land like the back of his hand. If anything seems off, we come right back. That night, Luke hardly slept. Visions of gold bars, hidden caverns, and outlaws from centuries past danced in his mind. But overshadowing everything was a nagging sense of foreboding. Sunlight broke over the ranch, the day crisp but clear. After an early breakfast, Luke prepared 2 horses, while Manny readied supplies, rope flashlights, a first aid kit, and a rifle for protection. Claire bundled in warm gear, carried the precious journal and the new map. Luke instructed Manny to stay behind at the ranch house to keep watch. I'm more familiar with that corner boundary. If something happens, I'll radio for help. Keep an eye out for any suspicious visitors. Manny reluctantly agreed. Just be careful, man. Mounting the horses, Luke and Claire rode out. The snow sparkled under the morning sun, but the air held a chilling edge that made Claire huddle deeper into her coat. They traveled for over an hour, cresting gentle slopes and weaving through stands of pine until they reached a rugged section of land. This corner of the ranch was full of steep ravines, partially frozen streams, and rocky outcroppings that looked as ancient as the earth itself. Using Dr. Jacobs's map, Claire tried to match the topographical lines to the terrain. We're looking for a large boulder shaped like a bear's head, she said, reading off a note. According to the journal, it marks the entrance to a hidden fissure or cave. Luke tied the horses to a sturdy branch. Then he climbed along the ridgeline with Claire at his side, scanning for any distinctive rock formations. The going was tough. The snow and ice made every step precarious. At last they spotted a massive, craggy boulder that from a certain angle did indeed resemble a bear's head. There, Claire whispered, heart pounding. They scrambled closer, breath puffing in white. Clouds. Behind the boulder lay a narrow crevice in the rock face, partly obscured by snow and overgrown shrubs. Claire's eyes went wide. "This might be it," she breathed. The entrance was tight, forcing them to stoop. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing a shallow tunnel that descended a few yards in. The rock walls bore faint markings, symbols carved centuries ago. They moved carefully, mindful of falling rocks. The passage opened into a small chamber. The air was cold and stale, the ground uneven. Luke's flashlight swept across the space, empty, just rubble ice and shadows. But as they stepped in farther, Claire noticed a section of stones piled unnaturally along one wall. "This looks like someone stacked them here," she whispered. They cleared the stones away, revealing a hollow behind them. For a moment, everything froze. This was the kind of moment treasure hunters dreamt of. Within the recess lay a metal chest, rusted and battered by time. Claire's hand shook as she reached forward, prying open the lid. Inside were odd lumps wrapped in disintegrating cloth. Luke peeled a layer aside to reveal a dull gleam gold bars, tarnished but unmistakable. Claire's breath caught in her throat. For a second, joy and disbelief mingled in her eyes. "It's real," she whispered, tears welling up. Before they could fully process the moment, a sudden noise made Luke whip around, a crunch of boots on gravel. They weren't alone. Claire clutched the flashlight, heart hammering. Emerging from the crevice behind them was none other than Axel Drake. He wore a triumphant sneer, a handgun pointed directly at them. Behind him, 2 more men appeared, each toting shotguns. The cramped chamber felt instantly suffocating. "Well, well," Axel said, voice echoing off the stone walls. "You've done all the work for us." How thoughtful. Luke's mind raced. They were cornered, outnumbered, and definitely outgunned. Axel stepped forward, eyes glinting greedily as he eyed the chest. Hands in the air barked one of his accomplices. Luke and Claire slowly complied. Axel nodded at the chest. "Open it the rest of the way," he ordered. Claire swallowed hard. Luke, moving slowly, lifted the lid fully. The men's faces twisted with delight at the sight of those tarnished bars. "Looks like Grandpa's story was true," Axel crowed, glancing at Claire with a venomous grin. "And you almost got away with it, sweetheart." Luke glared. "You want the gold? Fine. Just let us leave." Axel laughed. "I wish it were that simple. But we can't have you folks running to the cops, can we?" One of the other men, a burly figure with a scar on his jaw, stepped closer. Claire's stomach knotted. This was worse than she'd feared. They might very well plan to kill them. Suddenly, Luke made a desperate move. He lunged, grabbing the side of the chest and toppling it toward Axel's legs. Bars of gold clattered the heavy metal, banging onto the rock floor. In the chaos, Claire ducked to the side, heart pounding as a shot rang out. The bullet ricocheted off the cave wall. Sparks and shards of stone flew the noise, reverberating painfully in the enclosed space. "Run," Luke shouted. But the second accomplice blocked the crevice exit, raising his shotgun. Claire, thinking quickly, scooped up a chunk of gold and flung it at his face. The projectile struck with a sickening thud, causing him to stagger. Luke tackled him, wrestling for control of the weapon. Another shot rang out, deafening in the confined chamber. A roar of pain. Luke's arm burned from a grazing bullet. The melee continued, adrenaline surging. Claire scrambled for the exit, but Axel grabbed her arm, yanking her back. She lashed out with her flashlight, smashing it into Axel's jaw. He snarled momentarily, stunned. Luke, fueled by desperation and the savage protectiveness rising in his chest, managed to disarm the burly accomplice. Blood trickled from a wound on Luke's shoulder. He ignored the pain and swung the shotgun butt into the man's jaw. The man crumpled. In a heartbeat, Luke aimed at Axel, who still gripped his pistol, though his mouth bled from Claire's strike. "Nobody move," Luke growled, teeth clenched. "Let Claire go." Axel's eyes flickered with fury. Slowly he released Claire's arm. She stumbled to Luke's side, breathing hard. Her gaze darted to the fallen gold bars. Part of her mind reeled at the lost dream of quietly salvaging the fortune. But right now, survival was all that mattered. Axel raised his hands in a mocking gesture of surrender. "Easy, rancher. Let's talk about this." Luke's jaw tightened. "Get out and pray I don't call the sheriff." Axel bared his teeth in a crooked grin. "We both know this gold is stolen property. You think the authorities will just let you keep it? If you turn me in, you'll have to explain how you came to be in possession of stolen goods. The real owners might claim it. Everyone loses." Claire's breath caught. Axel was right. The gold had originally been stolen. Legally, it might not belong to them either. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, Luke just wanted these criminals gone. He tightened his grip on the shotgun. "I said get out." The third man, still at the tunnel entrance, sized up the situation, gun pointed. But he recognized they were at a disadvantage with Luke's shotgun trained on them. Axel's sneer faltered. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Then he motioned to his men. They backed out slowly, weapons in hand. Luke and Claire didn't dare move for a tense half-minute, listening to Axel and his men retreat, their footsteps crunching away. Finally quiet returned, though the tension in the air lingered. Luke lowered the shotgun, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. "You're shot," Claire gasped, scrambling to examine the wound. "It's not too deep, but we need to get you bandaged." Luke winced. "We have to get out of here before they come back." Claire's gaze darted to the chest. "What do we do about the gold?" Luke glanced at the gleaming bars strewn across the cave floor. He clenched his jaw. "We can't leave it here for them to take, but carrying it out on horseback might be impossible. Let's take a few bars as proof, bury the rest somewhere else, then come back with Manny and help." They hurriedly wrapped a few bars in cloth, careful to avoid straining Luke's injured arm. Then they replaced the chest in the recess, covering it with the original stack of stones to hide any sign of disturbance. They also brushed away footprints and scuff marks, hoping to conceal their presence. Exiting the cave, Luke and Claire scanned the ravine for signs of Axel or his men, but the area was eerily quiet. With hearts pounding, they mounted their horses and rode back toward the ranch, Luke gripping the reins with a pained expression. When they arrived, Manny rushed out to meet them, alarmed at the sight of Luke's injury and the shaken look on Claire's face. "Dios mío, what happened?" "You got shot," Manny exclaimed, helping Luke dismount. Luke grunted. "It's just a graze. Ran into some unwanted company." Manny led them inside, where Claire and Manny cleaned and bandaged Luke's wound. Despite the sharp pain, Luke managed to outline the events in the cave. Manny's eyes widened at mention of the gold. "So it's real," he muttered. Claire paced near the hearth. "They'll come back." "Axel's not going to give up that easily." Luke nodded grimly. He knows the approximate location now. It's only a matter of time. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Manny cleared his throat. "We need to decide what to do. This gold was stolen in the first place. If we go to the authorities, we risk losing everything and exposing ourselves to more danger if Axel tries to ambush us. But if we don't, we're basically in a standoff with criminals on our own property." Claire clenched her fists. "My grandfather always believed that if it was found, there'd be a rightful claim from the victim's descendants. He never wanted to keep stolen treasure, he just wanted closure. But I don't know how the law handles something so old." Luke ran a hand through his hair, which was slick with sweat despite the cold. "I know someone in the local sheriff's office. Sheriff Walt Henderson. He's known me since I was a kid. If there's anyone who might help do this by the book, it's him. But it's risky. That gold could be seized. The state might treat it as unclaimed property or send it to the federal government. It could take years to sort out. Meanwhile, we'll have a target on our backs from these thugs." Claire looked torn, tears brimming in her eyes. "The last thing I want is for people to get hurt because of this. It's not worth it if we're all living in fear." Manny pressed his lips together. "Luke, maybe we should talk to your friend Dr. Harriet Jacobs again. She might have some insight on historical ownership. Or we just do the right thing and contact the sheriff. Because if Axel Drake tries to come onto your property, we need law enforcement on our side." Luke sat heavily in a chair, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "Let's think this through carefully," he said, exhaustion weighing on his voice. "We can't let criminals roam free, and we sure can't handle them alone forever." That evening they planned to call Sheriff Henderson first thing in the morning. They'd gather the documented evidence, Claire's journal, Dr. Jacobs' evaluation, and the sample gold bars. Then they'd see if some arrangement could be made to keep them safe while the legalities were sorted out. But the night brought new terrors. Darkness fell across the ranch like a heavy curtain. Manny kept watch at the living room window, a rifle leaning nearby. Luke donned fitfully on the couch, refusing to leave Manny alone on guard duty. Claire sat at the kitchen table, poring over the journal with trembling fingers, as if searching for some final piece of wisdom. A sudden flash of headlights outside made Manny's heart jolt. He peered out into the blackness. 2 vehicles approached, beams slicing through the gloom. Manny cursed under his breath. "They're here." Luke roused, adrenaline surging. He winced but forced himself upright, reaching for the rifle. Claire's face went pale. "We have to call the sheriff now." But as Manny lifted the phone, the overhead lights flickered and died. The generator coughed, sputtering. The phone line crackled, then silence. Luke realized the power was cut. They were plunged into darkness. "Grab flashlights," Manny said, voice tight. "We gotta be ready." Claire fumbled for a flashlight, heart pounding like thunder. Through the window, she saw faint silhouettes creeping around the outbuildings. The ranch yard's floodlights were dead. The only illumination came from the pale moon overhead. Luke motioned them toward the back door. "Let's get to the barn. We can secure ourselves there." Manny nodded, and they slipped out as quietly as possible. Snow crunched under their boots. They kept to the shadows of the ranch house, hearts pounding. Dimly, they heard low voices and the clink of metal. Axel and his men had come prepared. Reaching the barn, Luke and Manny slid the doors shut, bracing them from inside with a heavy plank. Claire huddled near the wall. They switched on a single flashlight beam, enough to see each other, but not enough to broadcast their location. Outside, footsteps crunched over frozen ground. The men were approaching. Suddenly, the barn doors rattled under heavy impact. A savage voice rang out. "Open up, or we'll burn this place down." Luke gritted his teeth. "Stay low," he whispered to Claire. Manny stood beside him, rifle at the ready. The door shuddered again. Then a shotgun blast tore through the wooden planks, sending splinters flying. A muzzle flash lit the darkness. Manny dove aside, returning fire. A wild exchange, erupted bullets, whizzing the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the barn. Animals in the stalls whinnied in terror. Time slowed to a harrowing crawl. Another shot crashed through a window. Luke fired back, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. Claire clung to the corner, eyes wide. The men outside spread out, flanking the barn. She heard Axel's voice bark an order. "We don't leave until we have that journal and the bars they took." Manny cursed under his breath. "They want the gold. But it's not here." Luke squeezed a shot through a gap in the barn door. A shout of pain, he might have hit one of them. Another bullet whizzed overhead. The barn lights, already out, flickered from the generator's last gasp. Manny realized with horror they were pinned. If the attackers decided to light a fire, the wooden barn would become a death trap. Then came a new noise, sirens in the distance, faint but distinct. Sheriff's cruisers. Claire's heart leaped. Somebody must have seen or heard the gunfire and called the police. She gasped. The wail of sirens grew louder, accompanied by flashing red and blue lights that painted the ranch yard in a surreal glow. Axel and his men unleashed a final barrage of bullets, then scrambled back to their vehicles. The squeal of tires told Luke that they were fleeing. Moments later, the barn door was pried open by uniformed deputies, flashlights sweeping the scene. Sheriff Walt Henderson, a tall, broad man in his 50s, stepped in. "Luke Manny. What in tarnation is going on?" Luke lowered his rifle relief, flooding him. "Sheriff, we've got a mess." Paramedics were called for Luke's shoulder. Manny explained the basic situation that criminals had attacked the ranch. The presence of bullet holes, shattered windows, and traumatized animals was evidence enough for the sheriff to realize something major had gone down. Huddled in the ranch house afterward, Luke and Claire poured out the entire story: the discovered gold, the old journal, the men who had tried to seize it by force. Sheriff Henderson took it all in with a grave expression. Claire provided the sample gold bars as proof. "Let me get this straight," Henderson said. Eyes narrowed. "You're telling me there's a cache of stolen gold from the 1880s, hidden somewhere on Anderson land?" Luke nodded wearily. "Yes, sir. And these men want it." Henderson rubbed his jaw. "Stolen property from a stagecoach robbery. Legally, that's the rightful property of the stage line's heirs, or possibly the government. I'll have to contact the Historical Claims Division. But first, we'll run an investigation to catch these attackers. You said you recognized a ringleader by the name of Axel Drake." Claire nodded. "Yes. I found references to him in Billings a couple months ago. He must have tracked me." Henderson scribbled notes. "We'll put out a bulletin. The man's a known felon on some warrants, from what I recall. We'll set up patrols around your property, Luke, to keep you safe for now." Luke exhaled with relief, though a pang of sadness lingered. The gold was out of their hands. There would be no quiet profit for the ranch or for Claire. But after the violence they'd seen, maybe that was for the best. "How's your shoulder?" Henderson asked Luke kindly. Luke shrugged, wincing. "Doc says I'll live." Sheriff Henderson nodded. "I'm sorry about all this, son. We'll do our best to protect you. But you know, if this gold is verified as stolen, it might well end up out of your possession." Luke exchanged a look with Claire. She smiled faintly, eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you," she said to the sheriff. "My grandfather would want it resolved the right way." The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Deputies patrolled the ranch. Investigators from the County and State Historical Commission visited, verifying the site where Luke and Claire had found the gold. They catalogued each bar, astonished by its authenticity. Claire provided her grandfather's journal as partial documentation. Legal processes were initiated to determine the rightful ownership of the recovered gold. Newspaper reporters, sniffing out a sensational story, hounded the ranch for interviews. Luke did his best to keep them at bay, focusing on rebuilding the ranch's battered buildings and tending to spooked livestock. Meanwhile, Manny heard rumors that Axel Drake had been spotted in the next county, but managed to slip away from authorities. The sheriff assured them that a manhunt was underway. Tension lingered in the air, yet day by day, the ranch returned to something resembling normal life. One afternoon, as the winter sun cast long shadows over the snow, Claire stood by the corral fence watching the horses. She'd been staying in the ranch house, helping around the property, waiting for the legal tangles of the gold to unwind. Luke approached quietly, his arm in a sling. "How are you holding up?" he asked. She shrugged. "It's not how I expected it to go. Part of me wanted to find that treasure and, I don't know, maybe pay off debts, help people in need. But sometimes life doesn't work out the way we plan." Luke nodded. "We might not have ended up millionaires, but at least no one was killed. And hey, we didn't let those thieves win." Claire smiled softly, brushing back a stray hair. "True. I also found something else I wasn't expecting." "Yeah?" he asked gently. She turned to him, eyes warm despite the chill air. "I found friends," she said. "You and Manny. A sense of belonging that I haven't felt in a long time." Luke looked away, cheeks flushed. "Well, I'm glad for that," he murmured, sincerity thick in his voice. They fell into a comfortable silence, the horses huffing white clouds into the cold. 3 months later. Spring arrived in Montana, melting the snows and reviving the land with fresh buds and green shoots. The treasure fiasco made headlines across the state. A legal process began analyzing historical claims. It turned out the Stagecoach Company from the 1880s had long since dissolved, but a distant descendant surfaced, claiming partial ownership. The state's historical society also weighed in, wanting to preserve some bars for the museum. Claire's family lineage was recognized as having provided crucial evidence, her grandfather's journal. As a result, the courts allocated her a modest portion of the gold's market value as a finder's fee. Luke, too, was offered a small share for the location being on his land and for cooperating with the authorities. While not the vast fortune, people had imagined it was still enough to pay off some ranch debts, repair structures, and secure the ranch for years to come. Through it all, Axel Drake remained a fugitive at large, until one day the sheriff received word from Idaho. Drake had been picked up by local law enforcement after a botched robbery attempt. He now faced a laundry list of charges, including assault with a deadly weapon. The tension finally eased. Luke could breathe again, focusing on the everyday joys of ranch life. Manny, the rock-solid friend, teased Luke about using his windfall to expand the ranch or treat them all to a vacation. Luke just laughed, saying, "Maybe I'll take a day off." As for Claire, she decided to put down roots in Montana. She used part of her settlement to purchase a small plot of land near Billings. She wanted to stay close to the ranch and to the friends who had saved her life and helped her find a deeper purpose. She continued working with local historians to ensure the gold story was properly documented. Her grandfather's journal was donated to the Montana Historical Society, where to Harriet L. Jacobs, called it one of the most remarkable primary source artifacts from that era. One late spring afternoon, Claire sat on the Anderson Ranch porch with Luke sipping iced tea as the sun set in a blaze of pink and orange across the horizon. The events of the past few months felt like a lifetime. Claire's eyes drifted to the north boundary, where steep ravines and hidden caves lay quiet, the final resting place of once-lost gold that nearly cost them their lives. Luke took her hand in his, a gentle warmth passing between them. Neither had to say a word to know that sometimes the real treasure wasn't measured in dollars or gold bars. It was the bond forged in danger, the resilience of the human spirit, and the promise of new beginnings. Thank you for joining us on this wild ride through blinding snowstorms, secret journals, and heart-pounding showdowns. As we've seen, sometimes the greatest treasures are born from loyalty, courage, and the surprising turns that bring people together, proving once again that truth can be stranger and more powerful than any legend. If you found yourself lost in the wind-swept drama of Montana's frontier spirit, don't stop here. Please like this video, share it with friends who love an old-fashioned, pulse-pounding mystery, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the resilience, hope, and humanity hidden behind every dusty page of history. Your support lets us keep digging into the past, revealing new gems of adventure for all you treasure seekers at heart. So go ahead, hit that like button, share this epic tale, and subscribe to stay on the trail of more unforgettable stories just around the bend.